Now you can see CJ climbing in. It's actually quite a feat to do this in the vertical. So you have to think about your cockpit in an airliner, but now it's 90 degrees on its back, pointed straight up. And climbing in here without banging switches, which is really quite important, is actually physically tough to do. And you can, in a hurry, get yourself real hot and sweaty, which you don't really want to do because then you'll be cold. So you just kind of have to take it slow and be careful and methodical, and that's what CJ's doing.
These cameras definitely provide a unique view.
Can see them attaching a white hose to Kevin, and that's because it's actually still, it's quite humid, even though it's about 8:45 at night here in Florida, and so it's hot. And you really want to try to stay cool in these suits before you get strapped in, and that hose will actually supply some airflow to keep him cool. Here's CJ getting his helmet put on. George and Shane are helping him do that. When we think about being in an airplane and putting a helmet on, we're actually letting gravity help us, and so we're putting that helmet straight down on our head. But here, with the orbiter in the vertical, you're actually having to put it on sort of sideways, and it's actually a tough thing to do. You see George connecting his comm cable, and he's actually got a very specific way that he wraps that cable through CJ's harness. And there's actually a sort of large part that can disconnect if we have to get out of the shuttle in a hurry. We have practiced many, many times how to undo the very connections that they're doing so securely here, how to undo those connections in a hurry, where to reach them, where they are, and how to, we've got 3 connections in general. We've got our communications through our comm cap, and we have cooling, and we have oxygen for pumping up our suit and keeping our suit pressurized when needed. And we know exactly where to find each one of those cables. And in fact, before Shane leaves CJ after the comm checks, he'll actually check that he can find each of those important connections.
Thank you. Easy copies.
But the first 2 comm checks actually go to people right here in the Launch Control Center. And so the first one goes to the orbiter test conductor. And that person actually owns basically all those orbiter systems, everything to do with the orbiter. And so whenever they're going to ask the crew to touch any switch, that command actually comes from the OTC, from the orbiter test conductor. And then the NASA test director is more of an overall authority for the launch, for the whole vehicle, not just the orbiter itself. But then you, since they're not...
COC? Your steps beginning at 6:23. 6:23, 24, 25 are complete. Copy.
Now we see Kevin climbing into his seat, into the pilot seat. So on the right side hand of the cockpit.
Step 92. That completes steps 589 through 595.
Copy all. It's one of your finest on 162 with TLS. Copy.
He's hooking up Kevin's parachute there. That's his right-hand parachute riser. Now hooking up his left. And so Kevin is now attached to the parachute, and then he'll get strapped in.
Let's see, GSS. Step 654. Copy that.
Up on the flight deck, that's George is actually connecting. We've got Kevin's helmet on, and then he connected the cord that's inside that goes from Kevin's comm cap to the helmet, and then there's another cord from the helmet that's then routed out to the communications units. That clipboard there will actually go around Kevin's knee. When you think about it, here we are, we're actually laying on our backs in the vehicle, And so everything that you use has to be somehow attached to you, or it's going to fall down. You're not going to find it until you get to space. And so that means that Kevin's pencil is probably tethered there. It probably has Velcro there as well. That knee board is strapped to his leg. It's got everything he might need during ascent. It's got a flashlight right there by his right hand. Probably a spare pen, spare pencils, and notes that he likes to have readily accessible just to be able to glance down and see. The procedures that CJ and Kevin will follow on orbit are not books in their laps so much as cue cards that you can see, kind of white pieces of paper. They're actually cardboard, Velcroed in front of them, and that's so they don't really have to have those things in their lap except in contingencies. And even they have a book where they will actually turn pages, but each of those pages is cardboard, and then each of those cardboard pages is Velcroed together. So when they turn the page, it actually turns. I mean, it's easy to do with gloved fingers and quickly. You might actually think, well, here's, Kevin, the pilot of the space shuttle, STS-128, and wouldn't you think that he'd be doing a lot of these things himself, but you see George helping him quite a bit. But it is actually our practice, and what is highly recommended is that basically folks like George are professional insertion techs, and we want everything to be right for ascent. And they are the folks that know how to do it, and it's not the time to be dropping your glove or having trouble putting it on. We want to do this in as expeditious a manner as we can. And so we basically have an agreement with the insertion crew that we will let them do everything that they think is better done by then. So George is strapping Kevin's communication switch on there. That's a little box. It's got two buttons on it. One is for transmit, and one is for intercom. So intercom goes just to the crew, and transmit would go to the control center here for when Kevin does his comm checks. And George will make sure that he knows basically which button is which, so that Kevin always knows who he's talking to. With the spacesuit on and the helmet on, he's not going to be able to see those buttons and the labels on those buttons, so he just knows which one is closer to his toes and which one is closer to his head.